Close your eyes for a moment. 1991. A dinner table in Kensington. The candles are low. The wine is open. You are Brian May. Across the table from you sits the man you have known for 22 years, since before either of you had a record deal, since before anyone in the world knew his name. He is 44 years old. He is thinner than you have ever seen him. During the meal, you notice his leg. You try not to look. You fail. Freddie catches your eye. He says, "Oh, Brian, do you want to see what it's like?" And before you can answer, he shows you. Your face does something you cannot control. And Freddie Mercury, the man who performed for 200,000 people without flinching, who sang 4 octaves without effort, who never once asked anyone for anything, looks at you and says, "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to do that to you." Now open your eyes. He was apologizing for being ill. He was apologizing for what the illness looked like. He was apologizing for making you feel something he did not want you to feel in his presence. 22 years is a very long time. Brian May and Freddie Mercury met in 1970 when Brian was already playing guitar in a band called Smile, and Freddie was a fan who kept turning up to their shows and suggesting, with the specific confidence of someone who does not yet have anything to lose, that they could be doing more. He was right. They both knew it from the first rehearsal, not because either of them said so out loud, but because what happened in the room when they played together was different from what happened in the room with anyone else. And that difference was audible and immediate, and neither of them could have manufactured it if they tried. The thing between them from the very beginning was not simply friendship. It was the specific recognition of someone who understands what you are before you have fully understood it yourself. Brian saw in Freddie a performer of a kind the world had not yet produced. Freddie saw in Brian a musician whose guitar could build an architecture large enough to hold everything Freddie needed to say. Neither of them expressed this plainly in the early years. They did not need to. They built it instead. Album by album, tour by tour, argument by argument and reunion, decade by decade, they built something that belonged equally to both of them and could not have existed without either. By 1991, that building was complete. What remained was the two of them at a dinner table in the candlelight, with no stage between them and nothing left to perform. By 1991, the building was done. Innuendo had been recorded, had gone to #1, had said everything it needed to say about a man who was running out of time and refused to let it show in the music. Freddie had told the band his diagnosis in 1990, had sat them down in Garden Lodge and said, "Simply and without theater, you probably know what I'm going to say. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I just want to make music to the day I die, and let's get on with it." He had forbidden pity. He had forbidden softness. He had permitted exactly one response, which was to continue working. And that is what they did. Brian wrote him words on scraps of paper. Freddie sang them the moment they arrived. The agreement between them, wordless, absolute, was this: we will not talk about what is happening to you. We will only make what we can still make together. And so the apology, when it came, was not an apology for something he had done wrong. It was an apology for existing in a way Brian could not help reacting to. Here is what Brian May has never said publicly, but what lives in the space between his words. Every time he tells this story, he was not upset by the wound. He was upset because Freddie saw his face. Because in 22 years of performing alongside one another, across every stage in the world, through every argument and silence and reunion, Freddie Mercury had never once needed to read Brian May's expression to know what it contained. And now he did. And now it cost him something to read it. The dinner was not announced. There was no documentation of it, no photograph, no date fixed in the public record. It happened the way things happened at Garden Lodge in the final year of Freddie's life, quietly, without press, without the machinery that had surrounded every other dinner he had sat at for 20 years, the parties and the photographs and the names in the papers. In 1991, Garden Lodge had become something else entirely. It had become a place held very carefully by the people who loved him, Mary Austin, who had been his closest friend since 1976, and who came and went with the quiet authority of someone who has been given the most serious task available, Peter Freestone, who had been his personal assistant for 12 years and who ran the house with the particular attentiveness of someone who understands that the house is now the whole world and must be kept right. Jim Hutton, who had lived there since 1986 and who slept beside him every night and woke beside him every morning, and who had in 1990 received his own diagnosis and told no one outside the house. These were the people who held the space. And into that space Brian May came for dinner, and the candles were low, and the wine was open. And across the table from him sat the man he had known for 22 years, and the leg was visible. Freddie Mercury had been living with AIDS for 4 years by then. In that time, he had recorded The Miracle and Innuendo. He had filmed videos, including the These Are the Days of Our Lives video, which was shot in black and white because the color would have made the illness too visible, in which he looked directly at the camera at the end and said, "I still love you." 4 words that were not in the script, that nobody asked for, that he added himself in the last seconds of the last take, because he had something to say and a camera in front of him and no more time for doing it differently. In all of that time, through all of that work, Freddie Mercury had not apologized once. Not for the illness, not for what it was doing to the band's schedule or public image, not for the weight that had been placed, without his asking, on everyone around him. He had refused, categorically and consistently, to be a burden. And then his leg was visible at a dinner table, and Brian's face moved, and the refusal broke. "I'm really sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to do that to you." Brian May has told this story more than once over the years. Each time he tells it, something in his voice changes at that sentence. Not breaks, but changes, goes to a register that is quieter than his normal speaking voice and more deliberate, the way a person speaks when they are handling something they cannot put down but cannot hold easily either. What he said back was this: "I'm not upset, Freddie, except to realize that you have to put up with so much terrible pain," which was true, and which was also, contained within its truth, the single most honest thing Brian May could find to say in that moment. Not "I'm fine," not "don't worry about me," not the comforting lie, but the redirection of the feeling back toward where it actually belonged. "You don't need to apologize for your pain. What upsets me is that the pain exists." What Freddie Mercury heard in that answer is not recorded. What he did with his face after Brian spoke, whether he nodded, whether he looked away toward the candles or toward the window, whether the dinner continued as dinners continue, or whether it stopped for a moment and held itself. None of that was written down. Brian May was there. Freddie Mercury was there. The candles were burning lower. And then the evening went on. To understand why Freddie apologized at all, you have to understand something about who he was when he was not performing. The stage version of Freddie Mercury, the yellow jacket, the microphone stand broke into half its height. The call and response was 70,000 people. That version was built deliberately, constructed over years of rehearsal and instinct, a persona assembled to serve the music. The person inside Garden Lodge was quieter. He cooked. He arranged flowers. He cared for his cats with the specific, focused attention of someone who had chosen to love something that would not photograph well or make the cover of a magazine. He sent handwritten notes to Peter Freestone: "Dear Sharon, I thought you'd like this." He bought presents. He wrapped them himself, sitting at the table with the paper and the ribbon, taking his time. This was the man at the dinner table, not the performer. The man who had spent 20 years making sure that his pain was never visible in a room where other people were present, and who, in a single unguarded dinner, had failed at it once. Brian May left Garden Lodge that evening and drove home through Kensington. He has not described what the drive was like. He has not described whether he sat in the car for a moment before starting it, or whether he turned the radio on, or whether he went directly home without stopping. What he has said in interviews across 30 years is that Freddie never complained, that the word complaint does not belong in any sentence about Freddie Mercury's final year, that when he came to the studio, he came with purpose and without self-pity, and that the studio was an oasis for him, a place where life was exactly as it had always been. The apology at the dinner table was not a complaint. It was the opposite. It was Freddie Mercury working, even at a dinner table with the candles down low and his leg visible, to make sure that the people around him were not suffering on his account. The apology was a form of care, the most painful kind, the kind that cost the person giving it more than it costs anyone to receive it. Brian May would visit Garden Lodge one more time before Freddie died. He came with his wife, Anita. Freddie was in bed with the curtains open so he could see the garden. When Brian began making conversation, pointing at things in the garden, saying that's interesting, filling the silence the way you fill silences when you don't know what else to do, Freddie stopped him. He said, "Guys, you don't need to feel like you need to make conversation. I'm just so happy that you're here. So even if we have nothing, it's just having these moments." Brian May has quoted this sentence many times in the years since. It is the sentence he returns to when people ask him about the end. Not the apology at the dinner table, which was about what Freddie owed the people around him. This sentence, about having nothing, about moments, was about what he needed. They are companion pieces. The apology said, "I'm sorry for what my existence cost you." The final visit said, "Your presence is enough." Between those two sentences is the full measure of what it meant to be Freddie Mercury in 1991. Brian May has never said what he thought about on the drive home from that last visit. He has never said whether he called Roger Taylor afterward, or whether he went to his studio, or whether he sat in a room alone. He has said that he never heard Freddie complain. Never, never, never. What he has not said is whether the apology at the dinner table was harder to carry than any complaint would have been.